What teams could realistically make the college football playoff in the 2019-2020 college football season? Well, that's for me to know and you to find out. But you could find out right now by watching Lego on Fuego.
Hey!
Alright, so if you're a frequent subscriber on here, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to watch and support me once again. Now, if you're new here, welcome to the channel. On this channel, I make previews, predictions for the top 25 throughout the season. I make funny skits and just do all sorts of things related to college football. I also actively engage with my audience and do my very best to make creative and entertaining college football material week in and week out. So if that's something you think you might enjoy, subscribe right here. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so now that we got that madness out of the way, here's what I said last year after week 1 of the 2018 college football season. Spoiler alert, I was basically right. I think they go 3-1 in those games, 11-1 overall, and they edge out a conference champion in the long run. Debate ensues, people get angry, and they get even angrier when the Irish get smashed in the 1-4 matchup against Alabama. The Tide will win that game 37-9, and they will face, for the 4th time in a row in the postseason, the Clemson football Tigers. Right after the Tigers beat Oklahoma again, this time 34-26. Now the 3 champions before this year have been Alabama, Clemson, and then Alabama again. The Tide haven't gone back-to-back since 2011 and 2012, and by sequential order, it's Clemson's turn. Now does that mean I'm rolling with the boys in orange and purple to get revenge on Saban and company in the tetralogy? You bet your dabo do I am. Clemson, 2019 Natty Champs, 31-27. Take that to the bank. So as you saw, I didn't get the order right, but I got all 4 teams correct. I got who was going to play in the championship correct because that was, basically a foregone conclusion. And even against all the Alabama hype last season, I went with Clemson. Not bad after just seeing 1 week of action. Now this year, if you saw the Why the 2019 college football season will stink video, you saw that I already kind of made my prediction on this season. But I probably will be coming out with an actual prediction video after week 1 because I like to see what these teams are actually working with before I really go concrete on that guess. But in this video, we won't be discussing what's going to happen in the playoffs or even who will be making the playoffs. I'm simply going to be discussing who I think has the best odds based on their schedule, how good they are or not, and some other metrics. And I'll be making up some completely bogus percentages on their chances of making the playoffs that are absolutely made up and should not be taken literally at all. Don't get triggered. At the 11 slot, I've got Notre Dame. Now, of course, I'm a Michigan fan, so this might seem like a little bit of shade putting Notre Dame this low, but I feel like I should be given the benefit of the doubt because I did put them in last season. So my thinking here is that Notre Dame got in last year, and really honestly, since the college football playoffs have begun, unless your name is Clemson, Alabama, or Oklahoma, it's not uncommon to not make it frequently. More importantly, Notre Dame's schedule last year was much more favorable than it is this year, where their 6 hardest games are as followed and in this order. 6th hardest, Virginia Tech. Now they'll get the win here, but that's definitely no slouch, especially when you're thinking the 6th hardest game on your schedule. Number 5, Virginia. The Wahoos really got a lot done last year and are steadily improving. They look to be pretty dang decent this year. After that big win in the Belk Bowl over South Carolina, they're primed and ready to go. But Notre Dame will win this one. At the 4 slot, Southern Cal. Again, I believe Notre Dame will win, but this is when the tests really start to come in, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did not. Numbers 3 through 1, I think they lose. First off, you have number 3 at Stanford. I think KJ Costello at home outplays Ian Book in this one, and Notre Dame takes a loss. Of course, you know that I'm going to say that they're going to lose to my boys in maize and blue. That game's at the Big House. It's not the first game of the season this year. We'll be ready to go, and our offense is going to be a little bit more exciting this time around. So I expect that we'll be able to move the football a little bit better and just get the win at home. And lastly, there's no way you're going to beat Jake Fromm and company in Athens at Georgia. So I'm saying 9-3 for the Fighting Irish, a 7% chance of making the playoffs, and I'll give them a 7.5 out of 10 when it comes to difficulty in their schedule. Next up at 10, I'm thinking Oregon. Oregon, if you've been paying attention to my channel, is my surprise team this year. With a lot of the Pac-12 teams losing a ton of talent this year, the Pac-12 is wide open, and I expect Oregon to take it. Their only huge mistake was some scheduling issues. I mean, right off the bat, you have Auburn, and it's really been proven that scheduling that really difficult game early in the season hasn't really helped many teams. So I'm a big fan of just not doing it until the committee proves otherwise. But on top of that, in 3 weeks in a row, they have at Washington versus Wazoo and at Southern Cal. That's later on in the season, but I feel like that's a big scheduling flaw. That's 3 really hard games with no bye week straight back to back to back. In my opinion, there's just no way that they win all 3 of those games. So in other words, if they do lose to Auburn, I think they're in a lot of trouble when it comes to actually making the college football playoffs. They also play at Stanford early in the season and at Arizona State late in the season. Playing Arizona State in Tempe with Herm Edwards at the helm, that spells trouble. I do have Oregon losing to Auburn at USC, and I think they're going to lose this game at Arizona State. I think Justin Herbert and CJ Verdell have excellent seasons and really get them going on offense as they have in the past. But I think that there's going to be a lot of mistakes made on that defensive side of the ball, and there are some things that they haven't cleared up yet. It's coming, but not yet. 9-3 for the Oregon Ducks, 11% chance of them making the college football playoffs in 2019, and an 8 out of 10 when it comes to schedule difficulty. At the 9 hole, give me Florida. While I think Florida is steadily improving under Dan Mullen, and I saw that live and in color at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl against my Michigan Wolverines. And even though we had a lot of people out, Florida looks to be a team on the rise. And with Manny Diaz having a new start in Miami, Mark Richt out, his great recruiting out, Jimbo Fisher gone out of Florida State, his great recruiting out, I feel like Dan Mullen can really pull in some ripe Florida talent and in the surrounding areas. However, Florida's schedule is just too brutal this season. In fact, a lot of the SEC schedules are just too brutal. I'm the fan of a team that's in the Big Ten, but I'll never disrespect the SEC like that. At least not now while they're good. So let's look at that schedule. They have a neutral site game against Miami first week of the season, of course. They're also against Kentucky, who knocked them off last season for the first time in a long time. Of course, Benny Snell, though, is gone. They're home against Auburn, at LSU, at South Carolina, the game in Jacksonville against Georgia, and then they're at home later on against Florida State. All of that, plus an SEC championship bout against Alabama, should they even get there, is too much to overcome. Now, before I give my predictions on how Florida's season is going to go, let me remind you that I'm not trying to pick on anyone here. I'm simply just one guy with one dumb opinion, and I'm just making picks based on hunches and the information before me. In other words, disclaimer, this is nothing personal at all. Alright, with that said, I have the Gators losing at LSU after a strong 6-0 start, and I have them losing to Georgia. They're going to be 10-2, and that's an awesome year if you're a Florida fan. They're definitely headed in the right direction under Mullen, and they're only going to get better and better as the recruiting gets better and better in the Sunshine State. But with them having 2 losses in conference, and one of those losses being to a team that's also in the SEC East, they won't be able to get into the SEC championship game, and thus can't make the playoffs. 13% chance of making the big show, 8.5 out of 10 when it comes to degree of difficulty on the schedule. At number 8, I'm thinking LSU. For pretty much the exact same reason that I gave you for Florida. Let's go over LSU's tough ones. First of all, they're at Texas. Now, I think they win this one. LSU's defense, as I said in the preview video for the LSU-Texas game, does not have a weakness. Not one single one. Like my mom's cooking, they are nasty. I'm talking A's all across the board on that side of the ball. Joe Burrow returns with some experience under his belt, and you can see him starting to develop as a quarterback. As I said earlier, they'll beat Florida, they're going to win at Mississippi State, they're going to lose at Alabama, and between one of either Auburn or A&M, I think they're going to lose one of those as well. My bet would be on Auburn, as Auburn avenges last year's heartbreak against LSU. So by my count, that puts them at 10-2 and out of the SEC championship race. Again, the same exact thing as Florida, except they're in the West. No SEC championship game, no chance to be in the playoff hunt. 17% chance of making the playoffs, 8.5 as well out of 10 on degree of difficulty on the schedule. Next up, I'm rolling with Texas, who I think have the 7th best odds of making the 2019 college football playoffs. As I mentioned earlier, I do think they're going to lose to LSU. While I believe in Ellinger as a quarterback and his awesome wide receiver core, I just think that LSU's defense is going to stymie them in that game. But later on in the season, in their tough games, they're going to beat Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State last year beat them 38-35 in a heartbreaker. Texas gets revenge in that one. They're also going to do the same against West Virginia. If you remember, West Virginia last year drove down the field, got a touchdown, went for 2, and won the game in dramatic fashion. Texas this time will get revenge. Then their second loss will be to Oklahoma in what I believe will be one of the best college football games of the 2019 football season. This Big 12 race just between these two teams is going to be excellent. If you've watched my videos in the past, you know that I believe that Texas is going to lose this time around in the regular season, but they're going to do the opposite of what happened last year, and they're going to win the Big 12 championship game over Oklahoma. Reverse effect, Texas is your Big 12 champions in 2019. But I also think they're going to lose at TCU or at Iowa State, with Iowa State being the more likely of the two. As a result, and by my count, that puts them at 3 losses, so 10-3. I'm going to give their schedule a 7.5 out of 10 for degree of difficulty, and they have a 17% chance of making the playoffs. With these 6 best odds, I'm going with Ohio State. Ohio State's toughest 6 games in order are as followed: versus Penn State, at Northwestern, versus Michigan State, versus Wisconsin, at Nebraska, and at my Michigan Wolverines. If Jim Harbaugh starts out 0-5 against the Ohio State Buckeyes, I'm either going to do one of 2 things. I'm either going to cry myself to sleep every single day for the entirety of the 2020 calendar year, or I'm going to remain optimistic knowing that Dabo Swinney lost to South Carolina the first 5 times he tried. And we all have seen how that turned out. But I think we're going to be fine against the Buckeyes. We brought in a new OC to take the pressure off Jim Harbaugh. We have to be used to what their offense is going to try to do against our defense this year. Hopefully we have a different approach. And at the end of the day, they did lose Dwayne Haskins. They're really speedy receivers. And of course, Urban Cryer, which is probably the biggest loss. They're also going to lose at Nebraska this season. That's going to be their obligatory WTF loss after they lost at Iowa big time 2 years ago and at Purdue big time 1 year ago. This time, it'll be Adrian Martinez, Scott Frost and company that'll deliver the blow. The Buckeyes will be 10-2 and second in the Big Ten East, and Ryan Day's first year as a head coach anywhere, not just Ohio State. Degree of difficulty for their schedule is not hard at all. Honestly, it's a 6 out of 10 at best, and they do not have a tough out-of-conference schedule. I'm not knocking them for that. They definitely have played hard teams in the past. This year just isn't one of them. But because they're going to finish behind my Wolverines this season in the division, they of course can't win the Big Ten and thus can't get into the playoffs. I'm giving them a 38% chance, which is a huge jump from the 17% from Texas. Now, we really get into it. Here's the top 5. At the 5 position, I like my Michigan Wolverines. Now I know I said I think we're going to get in this year, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about the most likely chance to get in, and the 4 teams ahead of us on my list are either better than us or have a more favorable schedule than us. Michigan's schedule this season is pretty tough. We're versus Iowa, versus Michigan State, versus Notre Dame, at Penn State, at Wisconsin, and home against Ohio State. I think we're going to be fine against Michigan State and Iowa at home. Neither of those 2 teams, in my opinion, have the offense to keep up with ours. Against Notre Dame, as I said, I think we get the W at home. This is a whole different season. Can Notre Dame really keep that momentum going? I doubt it. As I said, they'll go a notch down, we'll go a notch up. The loss I do possibly see is either at Penn State. That's going to be a whiteout game this year. We're unfortunately in the crosshairs on the schedule for that to take place. Or we're going to lose at Camp Randall against Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a really good freshman quarterback coming in, Graham Mertz. He was the 65th overall recruit in his class, the number 3 pro-style quarterback, and a 4-star recruit. And of course they have Jonathan Taylor returning, who is scary good. With us losing Devin Bush, David Long, Chase Winovich, and Rashawn Gary, he could definitely find some creases and take some pressure off early on Graham Mertz. If he's able to do that, we're in trouble. If he's not able to do that, we'll probably get to Graham Mertz and he'll have a very tough time throwing the ball against our secondary. And as I said, I think we're going to beat Ohio State. We're going to go 12-1 and we're going to be a 2 or 3 in the playoffs. Doesn't matter which one. But again, I only have us at 5 on this video because it's about who I think has the best odds of getting to the playoffs, not who I think is going to get into the playoffs. I give Michigan a 50% chance to make it and a 7.5 out of 10 on degree of difficulty on the schedule. The number 4 most likely team to make it is Georgia. Now, I think that Georgia is going to make the playoffs as a 2 or a 3 seed, but we're only down to 4 teams on this list, and so Georgia it is. The bad news for Georgia is that it has to play Auburn, Texas A&M, Florida, Notre Dame, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Those are some tough games. The good news is that only one of those games is a true road game, and that's at Auburn in their 10th game of the season. Don't forget about that SEC championship game though, of course. They're probably going to get Alabama in that one. But as I said in one of my previous videos, I think Georgia's going to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game this year. They've been on the cusp of doing so over and over again, and this is the one where they get it done. Unfortunately for Georgia, because if they get it done in the SEC championship game and they have to meet them again in the playoffs, they're not going to beat Alabama twice in the same season. So I think the only game that Georgia loses this season is at Auburn. That's it. Too many home games, and they're too good at that stadium to drop more than that. Now, I do think that Georgia-Florida game is going to be very, very interesting. Again, I think Florida is one of those teams that you need to watch out for and respect as a Georgia fan. And honestly, depending on how some things go throughout the season, I might flip my pick on that game. But for now, I like Fromm and the swagger that Georgia carries about themselves. I just think they're the better football team at this point. best. They'll go 12-1. They're going to be your SEC champs this season. They have a 62% chance of making the playoffs in my mind. Again, those numbers are completely made up. And the degree of difficulty on the schedule is 7 out of 10, maybe even 7.5 or 8 out of 10 once you factor in Alabama. But again, I think they're going to win that game. Next up, I've got Oklahoma. Oklahoma is the team that I believe should get into the playoffs based on their talent and their favorable schedule. However, I think they're going to trip on the job. And this is no disrespect to Oklahoma. I know a lot of your fans are subscribers to this channel. This is just my opinion. Again, just an opinion. Oklahoma, like Georgia, has only one true road test. The rest of their hard games are at home. In my opinion, they have the easiest schedule of the 11 teams that I mentioned in this list. But as I mentioned before, I think they're going to lose to Texas in the Big 12 championship game, and I think they're going to lose to one of these following teams in order from most likely to beat them to least likely. At Oklahoma State versus Iowa State versus Houston versus TCU and versus West Virginia. Now, Oklahoma State tends to let me down when it comes to me wanting to root for the underdog over Oklahoma. But last year they lost in a very dramatic 48-47 game where Oklahoma State went for 2 and did not get it. That, accompanied with the fact that this game is in Stillwater, I think the Cowboys are going to take it. Finally. This is going to be a tough year for Oklahoma fans because they're going to start out 11-0 and on a huge high, and they're going to lose the last 2 games of the football season. It's going to be a huge season of what ifs. That's just what my gut's telling me, and I always go with my gut. Just ask Wendy's. Oh, and have you followed Wendy's on Twitter? That Twitter account is awesome. They're hilarious. Set the odds to make the playoffs at 75%. Degree of difficulty is just 5.5 out of 10. Next up, geez, who am I kidding? Alabama, Clemson, Alabama. Does it really matter who's 2 and who's 1? Both teams have a 100% chance of making the college football playoffs. Nothing's going to change that unless a plague hits and Jesus comes riding down on a cloud and he beams up Dabo Swinney and Tua Tagovailoa, and even then they'll both probably make the playoffs. I think Clemson grabs the 1 spot and goes undefeated this season. I think Alabama loses the SEC championship game to Georgia and ends up at that 4 spot. Bama beats Clemson in what will be their 5th meeting in as many years, and Georgia beats Michigan in the 2-3 matchup. Georgia and Alabama meet again, this time in the actual championship game, and Alabama gets revenge on Kirby Smart and his squad. Now I know I wasn't supposed to take it that far, but I did. That's what's going to happen. If I see anything in week 1 that changes my mind, I'll let you know. Otherwise, let the record show that those are my real predictions. They're in stone and I can't take them back unless I delete this video off of YouTube, and I'm not going to delete this video off of YouTube. I worked too hard on it. I'm Lego on Fuego. This has been a way too long college football playoff video. If you're still here, I'd love it if you subscribe right here to the channel. We'll be having the most creative and entertaining content all season long. I'm looking to do at least 5 videos a week. That's a goal, but I'm hoping to. Like this video if you liked it, hit that dislike button twice if you hated it, and I'll see you sooner rather than later. Oh, that was so funny it hurts.